Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. Good evening. I'm John Michaux, the president of Founding Forward. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's library hour. Founding Forward, as you know, is the nonprofit charity that's affiliated with the Union League of Philadelphia. Our mission is to create more engaged, more informed citizen leaders, and we do that through a variety of programs. Last weekend, we had 40-some teachers from across the country come to Liberty Hill for a 3-day program on the Declaration of Independence. We're anticipating, of course, next year, the 250th of the Declaration of our nation's founding. And so we have a series of programs for teachers on the Declaration that we'll do at Liberty Hill throughout this year. These are just a few of our wonderful programs for teachers and students, as well as all the other wonderful things we do with our collection, tours of this wonderful house, and great programs throughout our city, commonwealth, and nation. All this is made possible through your contributions, so I thank you for your gifts and your support. If you haven't yet figured out how to support us, we'll try to make it very simple for you. You could see me afterwards. We really need your help. This is an effort that is a big effort, the biggest effort that the Union League has had in the civic and charitable space since the American Civil War. And we're doing it because we have to. There's a crisis in civics education, and we need your help to help solve that crisis. So I look forward to that support. So a few housekeeping items for tonight. If you would take a moment to silence your cell phone. And please do. We had a little problem in our last program. We don't want you to be that person, this program. We will have a Q&A, of course, at the end. We will be using the microphones. This is the first time in a while we've used microphones, so let's be behaved. A couple sentences, and if you can't put a question mark at the end of that sentence, you have failed. Our crack AV staff will know my sign if you go too long. So we do have some wonderful programs coming up. Next week, we have a rescheduled program with Alan Gelzo on January 30th. It's a Civil War Roundtable, Our Ancient Faith, Lincoln, Democracy, and the American Experiment. That will be a packed house, so if you haven't signed up, please sign up as soon as possible. And please visit our campus in Valley Forge. We're scheduling programs at Valley Forge, including 2 speaker programs this fall, as well as other programs throughout the summer. So please take a look at our website. The Union League website will also have these programs as well. Contact us. We'd love to see you up on our beautiful Valley Forge campus. Everything we do is made possible through citizen leaders, generous leaders who give of their time and talent, and who want to create these citizen leaders for the next generation. One of those leaders is my good friend and chair of our education committee, Mr. Steve Target, who will introduce our program. Steve.
I'm really excited for tonight's program. I'm sure everybody else is as well. Dr. Patrick Spero is the Chief Executive Officer at the American Philosophical Society and an award-winning historian who was published widely on the era of the American Revolution. His 4 books include Frontier Country, The Politics of War in Early Pennsylvania, Frontier Rebels, The Fight for Independence in the American West, 1765 to 1776, The Other Presidency, Thomas Jefferson and the American Philosophical Society, and the focus of our library hour this evening, The Scientist Turned Spy. Before returning to the American Philosophical Society, where he was previously librarian and director of the library and museum, Dr. Spero was the executive director of Mount Vernon. He's also held positions as a historian at the David Library of the American Revolution and served on the faculty of Williams College. In recognition of his scholarly and administrative accomplishments, Dr. Spero is an elected member of the Royal Historical Society in London, the Academy of Arts and Sciences in Lyon, France, the American Antiquarian Society, and the American Philosophical Society. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome back to the Union League, Dr. Patrick Spero.
Okay, well, Thank you all for coming out on such a cold night. It's incredible to see such a packed audience and watching what John has done with Founding Forward and Jason. I don't know where Jason is, but just remarkable, this institution that you are building. And as John said, the work that you all do, I can't tell you how important it is to our country. I think we've all seen those reports on civics education in America that many Americans, adults, are failing basic knowledge. And it's vital work that the new generations enter the workforce, but also enter as citizens voting in elections with better information as they go into those voting booths, better understanding of how the government works and the principles upon which this government was founded. So it's incredible work, and thank you, John, for all that you do, and Jason. So I think we all owe them a round of applause as well. So as Steve said, I'm at the American Philosophical Society, and let me see by a show of hands, I know we're in a room full of Philadelphians, how many people here have been to the Philosophical Society before? All right, that's not bad, it's not great. Now, maybe it'll change after tonight, maybe it won't, we'll find out. Who can tell me what the American Philosophical Society does? Not a single hand. Well, I'm ignoring this because these are my friends from work. It's the librarian and the director of development, and I'm in the Union League, so I won't say anything because John needs the support too. But this is also our director of development. But no, I get asked all the time, what is the American Philosophical Society? Its full title actually is the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge. And we were founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1743. And when Franklin created the society, I like to say it was an inspired idea, and it's one that I think is still inspiring today. It's one of the reasons that I work there every single day and get inspiration walking in that front door in Philosophical Hall, which was built by Benjamin Franklin in 1789. So the reason that Franklin and other civically minded Philadelphians created the Philosophical Society is they saw a need, just like Founding Forward sees a need today to support civil society. That's what Franklin and others saw in 1743. This is a period in time in which the colonies in North America were beginning to lay the foundations for the future. They were building institutions to support this society, this prospering society. That's when they created new universities like the University of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania Hospital, insurance companies, fire companies. And what Franklin said in 1743 is this region, these colonies have so much potential. There are so many great minds doing incredible work here in the colonies, but they're not connected. And there needs to be an institution that will bring these leading thinkers together to share what they're discovering in their disparate communities with each other, and then share the best of these discoveries with the rest of the world. So that somebody in Boston can send something to Philadelphia that will then be distributed to Charleston or even across the pond to London. And so what Franklin proposed was we needed to create an institution to bring these leading thinkers together and share this knowledge that they're creating with the rest of the world. And that's what the APS still does today. Today we have over 850 elected members, over 100 Nobel laureates. These again are the leading thinkers today in America who are shaping what we know about the world, both past and present, so that we can enter the future more informed and create a better world. We have meetings that happen twice a year that bring the members together here in Philadelphia where they share cutting-edge research in all different fields. Our motto at the APS is nullo discriminate, which means we don't discriminate. We believe all knowledge can be useful. We also have a publications program. It's the longest continuously operating scholarly press in North America. I've been saying that for 10 years. No one's corrected me, so must be true. We continue since 1771, we've been publishing books and journals and articles. We continue to do so. We also have a research program, and this is Franklin. Franklin is always a tinkerer and an innovator. So Franklin modeled the APS off the Royal Society. There are these things called learned societies around the world, but what I think his innovation was is he said the APS needed to support direct research, to support these scholars who are making discoveries in the field. And so since we were founded in 1743, we've been supporting research. Today we support it on all 7 different continents. We award over 300 grants, again, in all different fields, conducting research in history, in anthropology, in biology, in astronomy, any field, and all continents. We had been saying we've done 6 continents, but in the last year we got somebody in Antarctica, so we could finally say all 7 continents. And of course, we have an incredible library that Michelle McDonald up here oversees, and that was my previous position there. Over time, the APS has developed one of the most distinguished research libraries, not just in the country, but in the world. We have over 14 million pages of manuscripts, Benjamin Franklin's papers are at the American Philosophical Society. We're the stewards of the Franklin papers. Thomas Jefferson was the society's president for 17 years, and he gave to us the journals of Lewis and Clark. So the journals of Lewis and Clark are here in Philadelphia at the Philosophical Society, and we continue to collect. We have one of the largest collections of endangered Native American languages in the world. We have material that relates to over 650 different Native communities, and we're working with them to revive languages. And history of science is now one of our fastest areas of growth. And we have the papers of 7 Nobel laureates, which is the most of any independent research library in America. Also something I've been saying for 10 years and no one's correcting me about. But you're all here not here to hear me talk about the Philosophical Society. Sean just reminded me of that. You're here to talk about my book. But as you'll see, this book is very much rooted in my time at the APS and as the librarian. So I was the librarian for 8 years, and one of the great joys of being the librarian were the treasures tours we give. And I'd encourage you all to come and join us for a treasures tour if you can. Most of the time as a librarian, I have all these friends, and I'd give them a tour, and they'd say, you have the greatest job in the world. It's because I'm there with all these incredible documents. But the truth is, it was kind of deceptive. The majority of my time was spent behind a desk doing email. But the joy of the job was getting out and showing off the treasures. And one of my favorite treasures to show was this document, the Michaux subscription list, which is the basis for the book that I wrote, The Scientist Turned Spy. So what I want to do is tell you a little bit about this document, what it tells us, and how I came to write the book that I did, and then go to tell you a little bit about what I say in the book. And then afterwards, I won't tell you it all because there are books available for sale in the back. So this is the André Michaux subscription list. Another pop quiz. How many people here have heard of André Michaux before? No. He is a remarkable figure. At the end of this, he's probably the most important scientist of the Enlightenment that you've never heard of but should have. So this document is one of our treasures, and I think in a moment you'll see why. So the top portion here is in Thomas Jefferson's hand. It was written in 1793 when Thomas Jefferson was Secretary of the State here in Philadelphia, and also vice president of the Philosophical Society. And what it says on the top here, you can read over here, is André Michaux, a native of France and inhabitant of the United States, has undertaken to explore the interior country of North America from the Mississippi along the Missouri and westwardly to the Pacific Ocean. This is Lewis and Clark before Lewis and Clark, 10 years before Lewis and Clark. The thing I want to point out is there's a comma here, and we'll return to that comma in a little bit, just remember. And then down here it says the said proceeds will go to the Philosophical Society. So this is a fundraising document. It says the APS is going to raise the money to support this expedition, and the Philosophical Society will take those proceeds and give it to André Michaux to undertake this incredible expedition. And then beneath it, you have all of the people. Jefferson sent this around to all of his friends in Philadelphia, all the people in government, all the scientists in town, and they started to subscribe how much they were willing to give. And on the top here, you have George Washington, $100, also President of the United States. And of course, Jefferson went to Washington first. He's the president. And he knew if George signed right there on the top, everybody else would follow, right? So beneath it, you have John Adams. In the middle here, you have Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State. And then over here, you have James Madison. And then you also have a who's who. You have here Robert Morris, the financier of the American Revolution, a Pennsylvanian, then a senator. Henry Knox, the Secretary of War. Beneath here, of course, beneath Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton. They both gave $50. They would not be outdone by the other one. And so this is believed also to be the only document to exist to have the first 4 presidents' signatures on it. And what makes this, and there's 2 other things I want to point out. The other thing is this is, again, it's a who's who of the founding era. It's Federalists like George Washington and John Adams and Alexander Hamilton, but it's also Jeffersonians, or what become Republicans. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. This is a bipartisan document at the very moment when the country is creating one of the most divisive partisan environments it's ever encountered. Probably even more so than today. And we'll talk a little bit about that as I go forward. The other remarkable thing about this document, it was only rediscovered by the Philosophical Society in 1979 when a high school intern was going through one of our vaults, found a scroll rolled up with a red ribbon, and said, this is probably above my pay grade, walked it to the librarian's desk at the time, somebody named Whitfield Bell, who unfurled it and realized he had a national treasure on his hands. So you never know what you're going to find. So this was, as I'm sure you can tell, this is one of my favorite documents to talk about when I gave these treasures tours. And everybody was always say, so what happened? What happened? What happened? And I would summarize in the same way that our website does. Ultimately, the expedition was called off due to diplomatic difficulties with France, which owned much of the territory to be explored. So let's remember how this was summarized. It was an expedition that, didn't go anywhere because of diplomatic difficulties. And remember that France owned the territory. Right? So now I'm giving all these treasures tours. I'm librarian of the Philosophical Society. And then what happens? March of 2020. I'll probably remember what that means. COVID. The world starts to close. Libraries start to shut down. And I, the father of three, get my evenings back again. My kids, most of the time, I'm spending my time on the soccer sidelines or the basketball court. I can't do my own research and writing. But with COVID, I had time again to start to do research. And Linda Jacobs, the director of development, said to me in April, she said, we're going to go to San Francisco after this thing's over in September. We're going to do an event at, what club was it? The Pacific Union Club. And I want you to give a 20-minute talk about the Michaux subscription list. It's really fun. Can you just do a little bit more research and develop a 20-minute talk on this document? I said, this is a great idea. And the next thing I know, I'm sucked into this story. I approached this document with 4 questions that I think are going to give me this 20-minute talk. So who was this figure, André Michaux? What's the real story of the subscription list? And what happened? Is that summary accurate? And then last, most importantly, probably the reason we do what we do as historians is, did it matter? What's its legacy? And so I started this expedition into the past while I was stuck in my house with 3 kids. And that 20-minute talk, well, it was going to be a 20-minute talk, as you can imagine, September 2020 never happened. And instead, I've written a 350-page book, and I'm now giving you all a 40-minute talk at the Union League Club. So let's just go through some of these questions. I'll walk you through them and tell you some of the things I found. So who was André Michaux? This is not André Michaux, but it's a really great depiction of who he may have been. This is another document that I found in the Philosophical Society. It was in the papers of a French botanist, and there's this incredible cache. He was an artist. Everybody that was a botanist in the 18th century often had to be an artist as well, because they're drawing what they're observing. You've probably seen botanical gardens. Some of you may own them on your walls, botanical flowers. He sketched what it looked like to be a botanist in the field. And this really captures, as you see, André Michaux was an incredible scientific explorer. And when I imagine what Michaux looked like in the field, this is it. Here he has a pickaxe. He's got a rifle over his shoulder. You never know what you're going to encounter, whether it be a fearful animal or just somebody that, you're in the middle of the woods. You don't know what you're going to encounter. And then behind his shoulder are all the treasures that he's collecting in the woods, new specimens that are going to change what we know about the environment in which we live. So this is kind of how I pictured André Michaux, because there is no likeness of him from life. But this is what I found about André Michaux. This is some of the parts of his life. So he was a Frenchman, as that document shows, a native of France. And he was born in 1746 outside of Versailles. This is Versailles here. He was born on this plot of land down here, what is now woods. It's actually a preserved forest outside of Versailles. When he was born, this was actually all farmland, and it was called Sartori. And everybody that lived on this land was leasing the ground from the French crown, and it was considered a plum post because the king had to permit you to lease it. It was a very favorable lease, and you knew that your primary market was always going to be Hungary because you were feeding the crown and everybody and all the servants that worked at Versailles. And so if you had a farm on Sartori, you could rely on having a very good living, a middle or upper middle class living. And this is a period of time in France where instability defines most Frenchmen's life. So if you had a farm here, you had a very good, stable life. And Michaux's father wanted to pass on the farm to his son. And he started training his son in all the agricultural techniques of 18th century agricultural knowledge. And Michaux follows in his father's footsteps exactly as Michaux's father wanted. He takes over the farm in the early 1770s. He marries, and he has a young son. And everything for Michaux seems to be going swimmingly until the unexpected completely redirects his life. And this is a pattern in Michaux's life, that he always seems to be on a path when something unexpected comes along and completely changes what he was doing and where he thought he was going. And in this case, it was a tragedy. his young wife died a few months after his son, Francois André, was born. And Michaux was sent into a deep, dark, depressive abyss. All of his friends and neighbors, it's in the records, wrote about what they feared what he was going to do. They feared he was going to do something drastic. And they all brought him over to their houses, trying to raise his spirits out of this chasm. And finally, he's invited over to have dinner with the botanists in Versailles. This is where the botanical gardens were at Versailles. It's really a site of experimentation. And this botanist meets Michaux, and he hears how Michaux is a great farmer, and he says, will you help me with some experiments? And so he gives Michaux a number of seeds that had recently been imported from foreign countries. And he wants to see if they'll grow in French ground, with the hope that maybe they'll help transform French agriculture. Maybe there'll be new crops that can help, stave off famine and help the agricultural output of the country. So Michaux goes to his farm, and he experiments with these seeds. And the next thing he realizes is that he's an incredible botanist, an incredible experimenter. And this work not only consumes him, it also consoles him. And he goes back to this botanist and he tells all that he's done, and the botanist realizes that he has an incredible genius on his hands, that he has a natural aptitude for this type of work. And so the botanist here takes him under his wing, and he starts training him in all the formal scientific practices of Enlightenment science. And Michaux excels so well that he's sent to Paris, where he starts to train in the royal garden. And once again, they realize that they have a genius on his hands. It's clear that Michaux has an incredible photographic memory. He can memorize things on the spot. He has a gift with languages. He's one of those, just a born genius. And soon, those in Paris realize they have to continue his training at the highest level. So they send him over to London, where again, he travels to the great botanical gardens in London, Kew, the Royal Gardens, and other private gardens in London. He meets with Joseph Banks, the head of the Royal Society, also a noted botanist. And he returns back to Paris, where they send him out to the Pyrenees Mountains, where he's supposed to conduct apprenticeships, where he studies under some of the great botanists of 18th century France and Europe. And he returns back to Versailles in Paris in 1782, having done all of this training. And what Michaux realizes is that he's ready to take a great expedition. He wants to prove who he is as an explorer, as a scientific explorer. And so he's lobbying the crown. I need to travel. Send me somewhere. Send me somewhere. And the crown decides that they're going to send a diplomatic mission to Baghdad, to the Middle East. And Michaux realizes this is the moment that I can prove who I am. I want to travel to the Middle East. And he's able to convince Marie Antoinette to fund his botanical expedition to travel along this diplomatic mission to the Middle East. So Michaux in 1782 departs, travels through the Middle East, where he encounters all of these incredible dangers. He is seized as a prisoner twice by pirates in the Persian Gulf. At one point, the British consul, even though France and Great Britain are great rivals, enemies, when Michaux is arrested by pirates and seized, he's held for ransom, the British government actually frees him, because they realize he's a scientist, and scientists need to continue their work, and they want to support, even though they're rivals and enemies, in this case, in this area, in this region of the world, they see themselves as allies as well. So he frees Michaux and then provides him with funding to travel and support, to travel to the Caspian Sea. And so Michaux goes up to the Caspian Sea and then returns back to Paris in 1785. And he returns laden with all of these incredible treasures, plants that nobody in Europe had seen, animal specimens that they'd only heard about but never actually seen, and also this strange stone called the Michaux stone with these hieroglyphics on it that nobody knows what they mean, and they aren't able to decipher them until the 1850s. It's one of the more notable early objects of Mesopotamian history that Michaux discovered. And the French court, they all know the name Michaux, and the king realizes that he now has a royal botanist. He has not yet appointed a royal botanist. He hears who Michaux is, what he's done, and what he's accomplished, and he appoints André Michaux the royal botanist. And now Michaux feels like, I have secured my future once again. I have taken this risk, I've left my farm, but now I am the royal botanist, which means that I have a stipend for life to conduct research, and the crown is going to support my research, my expeditions. And so he says to King Louis XVI, I have seen the Caspian Sea, I've seen Persia, and I know that there are even more treasures lying further into Asia. I want to return to Tibet, to Nepal, to India. And the king says, that's a nice idea, but I have other plans for you, Michaux. And this is, once again, where André Michaux's life is redirected. Instead of traveling to Asia, he is sent across the Atlantic Ocean to North America. Why? There are a number of reasons why traveling to North America to conduct scientific research was a high priority for the French government. First off, France had largely been excluded from British North America because of that rivalry between these two countries. And they've heard of all these incredible animals and plants that grow in this eastern region that might be imported into France and once again transform their agriculture. And I can't overemphasize how important botanical research was in the 18th century. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, they were all part of this incredible exchange of botanical seeds to France, to England, with the idea that there are plants out there that can be introduced into countries and transform their agriculture and strengthen their economy, but also strengthen their society. And so the idea is Michaux can go there and discover some of these plants. The second objective, the other objective he has, is to discover particularly strong trees, especially oak. Why? Once again, for national security reasons. France has been locked in a near 30-year-long battle with Great Britain. They fought the French and Indian War from 1755 to 1763. They then fought and supported the Americans during the American Revolution to 1783. And as a result of the demands that their military placed on their natural resources, French forests had largely been deforested. And what the Crown wanted was sturdy American oaks that they had heard about, but didn't have access to replenish French forests, to strengthen their military. And so Michaux's number one objective actually is to find oaks and send them across the Atlantic Ocean. And what you can see here are all the expeditions that Michaux took throughout his tenure in the United States, which was about a decade. He lands first in New York, and then he finally settles down in Charleston, where he opens a botanical garden in Charleston, 110 acres. And he also opens a smaller botanical garden in northern New Jersey. So to think about it, in 1785, or 86 at this point, there are two botanical gardens that are owned by the French government, large botanical gardens, one operating in the north and one operating in the south. It's a major operation. And over the course of Michaux's 10 years in America, he sends across the Atlantic 50,000 living specimens of plants to France. It's a major operation that he has going on there. And he establishes a pattern so that every year in the spring, he strikes out to conduct an exploratory expedition. And you can see all the areas he travels to, through Florida, down to the Caribbean, out west to the Mississippi River, along the Appalachian Mountains. And his pattern is every spring he goes out during the spring bloom to discover new plants. He then returns to Charleston, where he tries to cultivate these plants, to study them, to experiment with them, to document them, and then to ship them back across the Atlantic Ocean to France. And once again, everything's going swimmingly for Michaux. He thinks this is his future, this is his path, he's in a great pattern, and yet once again, his life is completely redirected. In this case, it's the French Revolution. Michaux is dependent on the Crown for his support. They provide a stipend for his work. They underwrite all of the cost of these botanical gardens. And Michaux relies on French funds for everything that he does. And so with the loss of the French crown, with the loss of his patron, Michaux, his funds soon dry up. And he's stuck in Charleston. And he starts to receive all of these letters from his supervisors in France. They say, we don't have the money to support you. We really think you should come back to Paris. You've got to abandon your mission to North America. And now Michaux realizes that if he goes back to Paris, right as the terror is beginning to unfurl, he's risking his life. And so what he does, and there's this great letter, he says, I have decided to ignore these letters, because letters got lost in the 18th century. I'm going to pretend these never really arrived. And so instead, what he decides to do is get as far away from the Atlantic Ocean as he possibly can. In 1791, he looks at this map and he sees all of this area that he's covered, and he realizes there's a big area that remains unexplored, not just by him, but by science in general, and that's Canada. And so he decides to take an expedition to the Hudson Bay. And so he sells a lot of property here to help fund this expedition, travels to New York, then up the Hudson River, and he recruits a group of Native Americans to serve as his guide. He has about 4 Native American guides, and travels all the way up, almost making it to the Hudson Bay, and then returns back to New York, and then finally to Philadelphia. And he arrives in Philadelphia in December 1792. And when he returns to Philadelphia, he once again looks at a map. And he says, now I've covered all of eastern North America. And the one place I want to avoid going to is back east to France. What remains unexplored? And that's where he comes up with this idea, this transcontinental expedition. It's in December 1792. He's in Philadelphia, and he decides, after this risky expedition to the Hudson Bay with just 4 Native American guides, that he has the skill and experience to take a transcontinental expedition across the continent. And so he goes to the American Philosophical Society, which he knows is the center of learning, the center of science, the center that supports research, with an idea. And he'd become friends with many of the leading scientists here in Philadelphia. In fact, at one point, he describes Philadelphia as the greatest city in the world, except for Paris. He's always a loyal Frenchman. So he meets with a number of Philadelphians, William Bartram, Benjamin Smith Barton, with this idea. And they say, this is a great idea. In fact, we know just the person who can help make this happen, Thomas Jefferson. Because Jefferson, for over a decade, had been thinking about this very expedition. As early as 1783, he tried to mobilize a group of Virginians to take this transcontinental expedition. He tried to reach out to George Rogers Clark, the hero of the American Revolution who conquered the West, to undertake this expedition. He couldn't raise money. In 1791 and 1792, he tried to raise money here in Philadelphia to send a scientist across, and he failed. But he meets this Frenchman, and he hears about this Frenchman's exploits. He hears about his travels to Persia, to the Hudson Bay, and he realizes, this is the person that can do this. I finally have faith, and I found the person to do this. And that's why he begins to write this subscription list. And that's the origins of the subscription list. And Jefferson is able to raise the equivalent of $1.75 million in 1790s money. It's a who's who. It's leading Philadelphia civic leaders. It's cabinet people in the cabinet, people who are in the Senate, who are in the Congress, scientists. It really is it's a who's who. And after they raised the money in April of 1793, they realized that this expedition is going to happen. And that's where Thomas Jefferson decides to exercise this clause that I'd left out before. So what he also said was, they're going to raise this money, and Michaux is going to travel westwardly to the Pacific Ocean, or in such other direction as shall be advised by the American Philosophical Society. Now, so what Jefferson thinks this means is, we've raised the money, therefore we are going to oversee this expedition. And if you remember Michaux, he is a loyal Frenchman. He is a native of France. And what he fears is that if he is seen as in the employ of the American Philosophical Society, then he may very well be seen as committing treason against his own government at a time when the guillotine is running fairly rapidly at this period. So Jefferson and Michaux get locked in this extended negotiation over the terms of the expedition. What's the relationship between the APS and Michaux? Are they funding him? Is he free to conduct research for its own purpose, or is the APS directing him? So Jefferson decides, you know what? We're going to create a committee of APS members, leading scientists like Benjamin Rush, Jefferson, Caspar Wistar. It's a who's who of leading Philadelphia scientists. And what we're going to do is we're going to create instructions for Michaux that outline the APS's priorities. And these are three of the chief priorities that they outline. So remember, Michaux was a botanist, and his goal in life is just to conduct botanical research freed from any strictures. And most of us just want to do whatever we want, right? And so this is what they say. They say, number one priority, your chief object of your journey is to find the shortest and most convenient route of the communication between the U.S. and the Pacific Ocean. The fastest way to the Pacific Ocean. Why? Primarily for commercial and trade purposes. The idea is they want to tap into the Pacific Ocean. How quickly can we get to the Pacific Ocean? How quickly can goods get from the Pacific Ocean east back to Philadelphia? Then second, under the head of animal history, not botany, but animal history, the mammoth is particularly recommended to you. And then, after you find the mammoth, if you could find a llama or a paca, that'd be really useful. Now, I don't have time to tell you why they asked for those two things, but it's really interesting why, and I'm happy to talk about that afterwards. But as I'm sure you can imagine, these terms are not what Michaux expected. And so Jefferson and Michaux are trying to figure things out. And once again, Michaux's life is completely redirected by the unexpected because this person arrives in Philadelphia. Edmund Genet. How many people here have heard of Genet? Great, a fair number of hands. He is, I heard somebody say Citizen Genet, that's how he's most well known. He is the first ambassador representing the French revolutionary government to arrive in the United States. And he arrives to great fanfare because at this period of time, the meaning of the French Revolution is one of the most hotly debated topics in the United States. It's a political hot potato. It really defines whether or not you're a Jeffersonian Republican or you're a Washingtonian Federalist. Why? Because the question is, what is the meaning of the French Revolution? Jeffersonians say it's a continuation of the American Revolution, and we really need to support the French because it's a sister republic who's trying to take off the shackles of monarchy and spread democracy around the world. And the Washingtonians, and especially Alexander Hamilton, say, no, this is not in the tradition of the American Revolution. This is a deviation from our idea of liberty. And in fact, it's just going to turn into tyranny and anarchy. And we all know who was right in this a little bit, right? But nobody knows at the time what the future is. And Genet arrives into this political controversy, and his objective is try to mobilize Americans to lobby the U.S. government to side with France. So in some ways, this is one of the first cases, maybe the first case, of foreign interference in domestic politics. And so what he also carries with him are secret orders to mobilize angry American frontiersmen in Kentucky who have indicated that they're frustrated with their Eastern government, to mobilize them to invade Spanish Louisiana, seize it from the Spanish, and turn it into an independent republic aligned with France. And the idea is if they can do that, that will pressure the Washington administration to side with France in this conflict. Now, George Washington himself, as the first president, when he confronted the crisis, he decided on something called the Neutrality Proclamation, which many of you are probably familiar with. What he said is this republic, our republic, the United States, its foundations are so fragile, we can't afford to engage in a foreign war. So we're going to treat the British and the French the same, and we're going to avoid a conflict. Because if we side with France, the British control the forts in the Northwest. They can easily take back the United States. So he realizes that the best policy for the United States is to avoid any conflict. Genet, of course, wants to force the Americans to get into this conflict. So he arrives with these secret orders, and soon after arriving, just 2 days after he arrives in Philadelphia, André Michaux, this French botanist, pays a visit on this French ambassador. Of course, Michaux is looking for money to support his botanical research, and Genet has these orders. He says, André Michaux, the perfect man for this plot. You are this great scientist who's traveled widely. You have the faith and confidence of many Americans. You're widely known. The APS has raised this money for you. I want you to travel out to Kentucky, pretend you're conducting science, but secretly, I want you to meet with George Rogers Clark, that same person Jefferson had approached, who has indicated he's willing to renounce his allegiance to the United States, swear his allegiance to the French Revolution, and mobilize a group of militiamen to invade Spanish Louisiana. And Michaux, the loyal Frenchman, does as he's asked. So he and Genet begin to plot and plan how he's going to travel out west to mobilize these Kentuckians in this rebellion. Now, Jefferson, through all this, and Genet become very close and fast friends. I mean, Jefferson and Genet, they agree ideologically, they meet all the time, they socialize. Genet becomes one of Jefferson's most frequent correspondents, he's like the third most frequent correspondence with Jefferson. They are great friends. And Genet decides, what we really need to make this secret mission succeed is Jefferson's support. Now remember, he's Secretary of State at this moment. But Genet thinks that Jefferson and him are close friends and he can trust Jefferson. So on July the 5th, one day after July 4th, Edmund Genet visits Thomas Jefferson's house, which at this point was on the Schuylkill River, on the eastern bank of the Schuylkill River. And you can see here, this is Thomas Jefferson's own account of what happened in this private meeting. Mr. Genet called on me, and you can picture what happened. He read very rapidly these instructions he prepared for Michaux, who's going to conduct it. There are two generals in Kentucky who have proposed to go to New Orleans and seize it. And then Genet says, he said he communicated these things to me not as Secretary of State, but as Mr. Jeff. What does he mean? Genet had said to Jefferson, look, we're friends. I'm going to tell you something as a friend, not in our official capacity. So if you keep this quiet, it'd be useful. So then he went on and he asked Jefferson, hey, as a friend, would you write a letter of introduction for André Michaux, vouching for him as a botanist and also saying that he has my full confidence? And Jefferson says, I took back the letter and wrote another one. So I want you to think about this. This is the Secretary of State who has just been told about a potential invasion of Spanish Louisiana, a country with which the United States is at peace and in fact is an ally with. The Secretary of State learns this, and not only does he not tell the administration he serves, he writes a letter that is going to help this insurrection happen. What do we make of this? I know when I was signing books, I had a lot of Jefferson fans come up to me. We can talk about this later. So Michaux, armed with this letter of introduction from Thomas Jefferson, and also a letter of introduction from a senator from Kentucky who Jefferson introduced Genet to, travels through Pennsylvania to Pittsburgh and then down the Ohio River to Kentucky, where he starts to meet with the leading figures of Kentucky, and finally meets with George Rogers Clark in Louisville, where Clark agrees to undertake this expedition. And Michaux, after Clark agrees to it, decides to return to Philadelphia, where he debriefs Genet and all that has happened. Now, in the interim period, as Michaux travels back to Philadelphia, Genet has sent reinforcements to Kentucky. 3 French military officers go out to Kentucky to help them mobilize and muster men. One of those French officials turns out to be a Spanish spy. So what happens is George Rogers Clark successfully mobilizes 2,000 Kentuckians to take up arms. They design their own uniforms. They muster and practice in the region. There are reports of iron forges burning brighter because of all the cannons they have to smelt to support this invasion. And they begin to design a number of bateaux or boats, a flotilla, a navy to travel down the Mississippi River to seize New Orleans. Now what happens is that the Spanish spy also is able to send information to New Orleans about all this happening in Kentucky. And that information eventually works its way back to Philadelphia, where the Spanish consul in Philadelphia goes to the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, to say, Thomas, you will not believe what is happening in Kentucky. And Jefferson says, oh my God, I've got to tell Washington about this. So he tells Washington, and it creates a great debate in the Washington administration. It actually has Washington saying, what is the proper role of the executive in such a case? Does the executive have the authority to assert federal, the military or federal authority in this region to tamp down American citizens in this region? It becomes a cabinet debate, and I could talk more about that. But what ends up happening, and this was one of my challenges as a historian, is that Washington decides this is a major moment in his presidency. It's actually not well recognized as a major moment in his presidency. He decides that his first duty is to the Constitution. And if he allows this invasion to happen, it will threaten the future of the Republic. And therefore, he has the right to have the army intercede if necessary. And so Washington is able to send a message to those in Kentucky, alerting them to the federal government's willingness to assert their authority, and everything just peters out. So as a historian, it's hard to write a book that is anticlimactic. And all of those that bought my book will see how you like it. And I think you should still buy it and find out if you like it. So, but the truth is, so that was my question. So did this matter, right? What was that last question? Does it matter? And the answer was yes. This actually had an incredible legacy, one that I won't be able to talk about too much because Jason's come up to the front to give me the hook. But I will give you a sample of some of them. So legacies of Michaux, I'll talk briefly about this. So Michaux, what happens? It's a great story, but too long for now. He eventually goes back to Paris, never gives up the hope to doing this transcontinental expedition. He's never able to raise money. He's destitute in Paris, decides to take an expedition, ends up in Madagascar, where he is stricken and he dies, and he's buried in Madagascar. And he's largely unknown today, and I could talk about why. I think there's a lot of reasons why. But his legacy really surrounds us. The mimosa tree is something he brought to the United States. The cultivation of rhododendrons that have graced many of our gardens. Michaux was the person who first discovered those to cultivate them for garden use. He surrounds us. He discovered 1,000 new species of plants in North America during his decade here. It's remarkable. The legacies at the APS, this was interesting for me. I said, so we have this great document. What does it tell us? And the truth is that the Philosophical Society has been pushing the boundaries of knowledge ever since then. We financed some of the earliest archaeological digs in the United States, the first complete fossil of a mastodon, that mammoth Jefferson was searching for. The APS never gave up that hope. We financed Charles Wilson Peale to discover the first complete mastodon outside of Newburgh, New York. We supported all the major scientific expeditions of the 19th century. Today, we continue to fund research in the field. And what I like to say is we may be this old, venerable institution, and if you visit us, you'll walk through these halls that from the colonial days, and it'll feel very historic, but we continue to push the boundaries of knowledge. In 2006, we created one of the first funds in astrobiology, so pushing into that next frontier, space, to try to identify life in outer space. So Michaux's legacy is still very much alive, and I'll point out that Michaux State Forest, the APS helped fund the work to preserve Michaux State Forest in western Pennsylvania. So lastly is the legacies for the United States, and I think this is what I'll end on tonight. So for me, this was the most surprising part of this talk. As you can imagine, I didn't know what I was going to find when I started this archival dig, this archival expedition started by that one document. Little did I know that I'd go to something as essential as the founding of our country and something as essential as citizenship. Because what really happened during this near rebellion was a debate over the meaning of citizenship itself. Because those in Kentucky had to marshal arguments that would justify what they were doing. And the idea of citizenship in 1793 was a very new concept. You know, Americans had been subjects to a crown until 1776. And the Federal Republic is just a few years old at this point. What does it mean to be a citizen? And what those in Kentucky said is citizenship ends at the borders of the country. My patriotic duty and obligations end as soon as I leave this country. So if the United States policy is peace with Spain, that's nice. When I'm in the United States, I'll abide by that. But as soon as I leave, I can do whatever I want. And this was an incredible debate. And what Washington said is, no, your duties and obligations as a citizen travel with you wherever you go. And so in 1795, the United States Congress, in an act of bipartisanship, prodded by Washington, passed a law to establish the duties and obligations of citizens. It was a law that was renewed and renewed until it was made a permanent part of the U.S. Code in the early 19th century. So little did I know, when I started this question about the Michaux subscription list, I was going to end up on something as essential and fundamental as the very meaning of citizenship. And for me, that's what being a historian is all about. It's also why places like the American Philosophical Society and the Union League exist. Because this one document led us on this journey. And when you think about the millions of documents that are in the vaults of the American Philosophical Society, think about all the stories that are just waiting to be told. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. That was wonderful, and what a great connection. Patrick asked me if I would actually interview him for this program, and I said not only hadn't I read the book, but I had absolutely no idea what the subject was, and so I couldn't do that. But I really didn't understand that this subject was, what does it mean to be an American citizen?
Neither did I.
So thank you for that, Patrick. So we do have time for a few questions. Just raise your hand. Right over here.
So what about the sun?
Oh, great question. So Francois André Michaux, thank you for asking that, because now I'm going to be able to talk longer about this slide. So Francois André Michaux, when André Michaux undertakes his expedition to the Middle East, his son is just still a toddler, so he leaves him with his sisters, and his sisters raise him until he returns. when Michaud's now going to North America, his son is a teenager, and he decides this is the perfect time to train his son as a protege in botanical research. He wants him to follow in his footsteps, just like his father wanted him to follow in his footsteps. Obviously, Michaud didn't, went into this different path, but he wanted the same for his son, to be a botanist. And so Francois André Michaux becomes a leading botanist of his own day. He becomes a member of the American Philosophical Society. In the early 19th century, he's sent to the United States to retrace his father's footsteps. So he actually travels almost everywhere his father traveled, and he wrote a journal about it that's very well known. And the reason he was sent to the United States was also to figure out the French government still owned these botanical gardens, and he had to go there to try and sell them. So he does so. Francois-André Michaux dies, and when he dies, he leaves the entire Michaux estate to the American Philosophical Society. And so in the 1870s, we received this incredible pot of money. And the APS says, so what should we do with this money? How can we honor Michaux and also do something, within our mission and good for the world? And it's really interesting because it's the 1870s, it's after the Industrial Revolution, and the United States is facing the same crisis that France was facing in the 1780s. The Industrial Revolution had really deforested Pennsylvania's countryside. And this is the birth of the conservation movement, the forestry movement. And so they decide to use this money to support a lecturer to travel around the state of Pennsylvania advocating for the preservation of forests in the state. And this has been studied by other historians, and he started off talking to a small audience of just 10 people in an empty auditorium. But he was such a great lecturer that soon it became hundreds and thousands, and everybody knew his name. And eventually, the state of Pennsylvania creates the Department of Forestry and appoints him the first director. And he decides that the first forest in Pennsylvania that should be preserved is Michaux State Forest. So it's this incredible story that really also is connected to the Michaux subscription list as well.
Right over here, Peter. Tom, if you could use a microphone. There you go.
Is there a connection between this story and the eventual Louisiana purchase?
Indirect. Jefferson is obsessed with acquiring this territory. And the truth is, the Michaux subscription list, the reason it's a bipartisan document, what I point out is that Federalists and Republicans couldn't agree on anything except for one thing. The future of the United States rested in the West. And that's why they wanted to undertake this expedition. And so I think the idea of acquiring Louisiana was always on Jefferson's mind. When people ask me, how do you explain what Jefferson did in this? One interpretation is that Jefferson figured, look, we're going to acquire this territory sometime. If a bunch of Americans seize it and turn it into a republic, they'll just eventually come into the American fold. So we might be able to acquire this territory for the republic then. So this, the Louisiana seizing that territory is on Jefferson's mind from the very early days. Interestingly, the Lewis and Clark expedition, which after the Louisiana Purchase is the first transcontinental expedition, we know that Jefferson had these instructions by his side when he wrote instructions to Meriwether Lewis. There are verbatim passages taken from these instructions to Michaux that appear in the Lewis and Clark instructions. The document you're looking at here is in the Philosophical Society. It's also in Thomas Jefferson's hand. It's in the Caspar Wistar papers.
Peter, right over here, Peter.
You said there was a controversy because Jefferson, I guess, was going behind the back of his own government on this personal letter that he sent. Did that ever get found out by his boss? And did anybody ever discover that?
No, and that's a great part of the story is that, because the information was flowing through the Secretary of State, he controlled the narrative. And so Michaux is never found out, nor is Thomas Jefferson. And that's the remarkable piece of the story. Eventually, George Rogers Clark is found out. All these people are found out, but Jefferson skates by, as does André Michaux. So.
You mentioned in your book how scientific and impersonal Michaux's notes can be. If you could speculate, had Michaux known how this would all end, how would he have spent his time post-French Revolution differently?
Oh, that's great. Somebody that's read the book. So So the question is, if Michaud had known what his life was going to be, what would he have done? And he would not have gone back to France. He did not really want to go back to France. He was always a loyal Frenchman. I mean, he never gave up his faith and loyalty to France. In fact, when he was on hard times, the state of South Carolina said, hey, if you become an American citizen, we will fund your botanical garden in Charleston. And he refused to do so because he would not renounce his allegiance to France. The whole debate with the APS was he's a loyal Frenchman. If he's in the employ of the APS and it's funded by all these people in government, is he actually working for the U.S. government? And would that betray his loyalties to France? So unlike those in the frontier whose allegiance was a little murky, Michaud's was not. So he was always a loyal Frenchman, but he loved the United States. I mean, he loved what he was discovering. He was dedicated to science, and he thought this is where he should be. And so he's trying to mobilize, even after this happens, he's continuing to try to raise money for this transcontinental expedition. He can't. And then finally, a group of APS members say, look, Andre, even if you undertake this expedition, you're probably going to die. You've got to go back to Paris and publish everything that you've done so you can preserve it for posterity and then come back. And so that's his plan, is to go to France, publish what he's done, and then quickly return to the United States and undertake this expedition. The problem is he struggles with publishing, he never has any money, and he ends up on this expedition to Madagascar. So thanks for that question.
I think we have time for one more question. Right over here, Jason.
A, what happened to the two gardens, one in New Jersey and one in Charleston? And B, didn't he try to send his Madagascar stuff back to France and it was lost?
Good questions. So the gardens, what happens? So in New Jersey, he had basically a deputy, and he deputized, he had his deputy run the New Jersey garden. And once Michaud left, he never got along with his deputy. I mean, you could see it. If anyone has supervised people, how you have to kind of document things. And he was purposely trying to document every time he was ignored. And he had instructed him on something, and he threatened to send him back to France if he didn't do it. So the New Jersey guy, he after Michaud leaves, he takes over in possession of the garden. And so that garden, essentially he's able to acquire that property without ever purchasing it. Today it's a cemetery. And then the Charleston garden, his son is able to actually, kind of reclaim it for France, and they sell it, but it just kind of fades away. The garden in Charleston, South Carolina today is by the airport. Anybody flying to Charleston airport before? When you go into Charleston airport, the highway is called Michaud Parkway. And there's a mural, which everybody ignores. I don't blame you. I would have ignored it. But when you get out of the airport, there's this incredible mural that depicts Michaud's life. And now maybe if you travel there, you'll recognize it and appreciate it. An interesting side story is there's a part of that land that is undeveloped. And during this research, I started to meet all these other Michaud aficionados, and we have all these email exchanges. One of them was a doctor that lived in Charleston, South Carolina, and as soon as COVID opened up, decided to go down there to try and walk in Michaud's footsteps. And he says to me, I can get us access to this undeveloped part of Michaud's old garden. And I said, okay, this will be fun. I feel like I'm Michaud. I'm on an expedition. And we get there, and there's a fence, and he's like, this is actually owned by the U.S. Air Force. And the last time I was here, they chased me off with guns. But I think with COVID, they haven't been patrolling like they used to. So, and he's like, to get to it, we have to walk through the sewer and then pop up on the other side. So I figured, what the heck? So I did it, and we didn't really find anything except on the way out, he found an oak leaf. And he gave one to me and took one, and neither one of us are botanists. He went home and he discovered it was the bur oak, which is native to North Carolina. So that'd be really interesting. That could have been Michaud's oak that he brought there. A few weeks later, I received a package in the mail with no signature on it or return address, with all these shards of pottery in it. So that's what happened to the Charleston garden. Your second question, Madagascar. Some was lost, but not all. He actually corresponded back to France. And the truth is, this Madagascar, there's only so much I can tell. So the Madagascar expedition was actually supposed to go to Australia. And the expedition, the captain of the ship was this real martinet, and nobody liked him. He was always on the verge of mutiny. And so when Michaux saw the biodiversity of Madagascar in this area, the Isle of France he also went to, he realized, oh, wow, this is incredible. I mean, I want to stay here. And so he ends up in Madagascar. He actually he tries to build a botanical garden. His goal, actually, once he gets to Madagascar, is to establish a botanical garden in Madagascar like he had in Charleston and start sending goods back to France. He's only there for a few months before he is stricken with some sort of illness, fever and the like.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Patrick Spero for a great talk. Thank you. We do have books for sale in the back, and I will be buying one, Patrick, because I do want to read the rest of this story. We'll see you next Thursday with Alan Galzo, Ancient Faith. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.